Welcome to Wall Street versus Main Street, a different take on the investment show with our host, Dax White. Dax White is the managing partner of the White Law Group, a national securities fraud, securities arbitration, and investor protection law firm with offices in Chicago, Illinois, and Vero Beach, Florida. The White Law Group has represented hundreds of investors in FINRA arbitration claims against their brokerage firms, and throughout this show, Mr. White will shine a light on some of the tricks of the brokerage industry, while also providing valuable information for investors on how to successfully navigate the investor-financial advisor relationship.
Welcome, everyone. You're listening to Wall Street versus Main Street. I am your host, Dax White. As we mentioned in the intro, this is a different take on the investment program. I'm not here to give investment advice, buy this, sell that. That's not the purpose of the show, and frankly, I'm not a licensed investment professional to do that. Rather, I'm a securities attorney who represents investors in claims against brokerage firms. And through that work, I've seen over the course of my career a lot of the things the industry does just to take the money out of your pocket and put it in theirs. Because in the micro level, that's not what it is. It's you with your financial advisor trying to make choices on how to invest your money. But at the macro level and on Wall Street, these big companies, it is about maximizing profits and making sure to make as much money as they possibly can off of their clients. And there's tricks that they use to maximize those commissions. And there's information that I think would be valuable to investors as they embark on that relationship to even the playing field a bit, so that you ask the right questions and make sure that your financial advisor is looking out for your interests. So that's what we're going to do week to week is tackle those topics. This week, I'm going to go through sort of the top 10 investment frauds that are out there, things to be on the lookout for, tips on how you can better identify these types of investments so that you can protect yourself and make sure that you're number one, working with the right person, and number two, investing in the right things. So that's what we're going to do this week. The number one investment fraud, which is both the most difficult to identify and the most cataclysmic, unfortunately, for investors is the Ponzi scheme. I think a lot of people through the news, and hopefully not through personal experience, are aware of what a Ponzi scheme is, but basically that's any investment where the investment sponsor, the person who's put it together, is paying you with new people's money to give you the illusion that the investment is going great, when in reality, all he's doing is taking new investors and giving you a portion of their new investment to create this illusion for you. That is, of course, why it's so difficult to identify, is because you're getting your money. You're thinking everything is fine. I invested $100,000. He told me I'd get 10%, and each year he gives me $10,000, and I got a statement that says I've got my $10,000. I have actually got the money, so why would there be any cause for alarm? And Bernie Madoff, I think, is the most famous of the Ponzi schemes, and the reality is that took advantage of very sophisticated people for a number of years. Some of the biggest losers on that are the owners of the New York Mets. This is a family worth hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. So unfortunately, that's one that's very difficult to identify. I think the easiest way that you can have at least some cause for concern would be what they're promising you. And in order to continue to bring in new money, because that's how these things collapse, is that they stop being able to bring in new money, and then you're still expecting your payment, but they don't have any money to give you. And so the way to bring in new money is to make outlandish promises in terms of the return. And so on that $100,000 in a typical Ponzi scheme, it's not going to be, I'll give you a 4% return. It's going to be something larger. It's going to be like 15% or something that's out of the norm. And in any investment, investors have to understand there's an absolute correlation between risk and return. And so if you're being told that there's this huge return of 15, 20% per year and it's guaranteed and there's no risk, that's a red flag. That's the easiest way to have some sense that maybe this is a Ponzi scheme, because frankly, that kind of return is very difficult. My dad, who fortunately it didn't turn out to be a Ponzi scheme, or at least it hasn't yet, but called me not too long ago. He's a lawyer, so he should know better. But he told me that he had been pitched this investment that was paying 12% per month. And I said, stop right there. That's all I need to know. That's a problem. That's a red flag. No investment should be able to pay that much. The reality is, if you're putting an investment together, why would you pay a return that high when the market is basically, without risk right now. I mean, what are CDs paying? 0.2%? You don't have to pay an investor 12% per month to get somebody interested. You could pay them 6% per year and you're going to have a line out your door. So if they're offering you that much of a return, there's probably a reason for it. Huge red flag. So, but Ponzi schemes is the number one, not necessarily in terms of being the most common, but certainly in terms of it being the most damaging. Because of course, what ends up happening, what's the outcome? Bankruptcy receiver steps in, the money's gone. Whoever put it together, almost every single time they've spent it on some sort of like outlandish lifestyle. So the money's gone. And then the worst case scenario is for that investor who put in $100,000 was getting $10,000 return. Let's say they've been in it for 5 years. The bankruptcy receiver is going to come after that 50 grand because that was somebody else's money and they're going to want it back. And maybe you spent it, or maybe, you were living on it, whatever the case may be. But that's why it can be so cataclysmic, is because, it comes after the investor who was duped as well. But the bankruptcy receiver, their job is to put everybody in the same position. And so these new investors who just basically gave their money to you, they're going to get some of that back, and they're going to get it from you. So those are that's the one that's most damaging. The second most common or the second biggest investment fraud is promissory notes. And I think this one has to do simply with regulation. These aren't stocks. They're not mutual funds. This is literally someone writing a note saying, I will pay, you loan me $100,000 and I will pay you a 6% return or 8%, whatever the terms of the loan are, with a, maturation of 2-3 years, whatever the terms are. But we see a lot of instances where these are abused. And again, I think it has to do with regulation, but unfortunately, it's oftentimes financial advisors who are putting them together, and whether or not they're regulated or not regulated, they're putting themselves out there as investment professionals and saying, "I've got this great deal for you," and it's usually either they're in financial trouble and they're basically borrowing money from you to keep things afloat, or they're telling you, "I've got this great business idea and I'm starting this, and we're offering the terms as a promissory note," whatever the case may be. Promissory notes are generally cause for concern, and the problem is, that they're only backed by whoever is offering you the note, and if they can't pay, generally it's because they don't have any money. So what's your recourse? Limited, because you can't get blood from a stone. So that's another one where if your financial advisor is offering you a note, particularly one that's backed by him or her, that's a red flag. And certainly cause for concern and cause for some additional questions before you make that investment. Next one we see, or the next one in the top 10, which we deal with a ton in our particular practice, has to do with private placements. And a private placement is a direct participation investment between an investment sponsor and the investor, and it's an exemption to SEC requirements on registration. So as long as you offer it to accredited investor and you offer it to a certain number and you don't advertise it a certain way, you can offer this private placement without having to go through the rigors of an SEC registration like a public company would. And so with that, you have some potential hurdles because, again, it's not regulated in the same way that some investments are. And the other problems that we see is that in order for, these are smaller companies that are trying to raise capital. And in order to do it, they need somebody to sell it, somebody who has clients who are willing to invest in it. And generally speaking, they offer a huge sales commission to do it because it's an untraditional investment. Most people go to a financial advisor saying, I want stocks and mutual funds or bonds or what have you. And so if they're being offered a private placement, it's going to take a sales pitch. It's going to take a broker who's willing to, make representations about how the investment will perform and what have you. And in order to incentivize a financial advisor to be willing to do that, they pay a huge commission on private placements. And so to me, that's really where the problem comes in on this one, is just the motivation of the broker and why they're making the recommendation. They might hope that it works out, but you have to wonder if there's a significant conflict of interest in making that recommendation. Is there something that maybe would be better suited for you, but doesn't pay the broker as much? And so that's why they keep pushing this private placement. So if you're being offered a private placement, That doesn't mean it's a bad one. There's tons of them out there. There's good ones and there's bad ones, but it is at least pause for concern and reason to ask some additional questions. Hey, how much are you being paid on this? Is it liquid? What's the track record of the company? Make sure that you're asking more questions, because that's one where we see a lot of instances of fraud. The next one is currency scams. And frankly, this one just has to do with the complexity and just risk in general with this particular type of trading, which is basically trading on where a particular currency will be relative to other currencies in the future. And there's an inherent amount of risk. I mean, look at what's going on in the market today. The dollar has grown exponentially relative to other currencies over the last 6 months to a year. If you were betting the other direction, you would have gotten crushed. And so it's an enormous amount of risk. And typically the scams have to do with guarantees of huge returns. These are often cold call situations where they call you on the phone and say, hey, do you invest in currencies? Oh, you should. Here's all these great returns that we've been getting, and here's how we do it. And we've got this algorithm and whatever they're doing. But the hook is usually the huge return. And this investment just in general should be cause for concern, because if you're not a sophisticated investor, you probably shouldn't be trading currencies. And so if somebody is telling you, oh, you can do it, no problem, that's a red flag, because it is a very complicated investment strategy. And unless you're a sophisticated trader, you should be steering clear of that. The next one it's similar in terms of its complexity and problems, but it's investing in precious metals. In my experience, it's the same sales pitch. It's somebody who's, who knows where they get these lists, but they've cold called you at home and said, hey, I've got the next great thing. Let's buy silver. Let's buy gold. Look at the returns over the last, 5 years, and look how much it's gone up. And, that should be a cause for concern right there, because it's already gone up. Where is it going to go next? And they sort of pitch it as, oh man, we're going to have this infinite, here's our arc. It's just going to keep going up forever. Usually they don't start pushing it until it's about to implode, and maybe they've got their own reserves that they're trying to unload. But we do see a lot of problems with this. Ultimately, it does get back to them making representations about huge returns, and it being a very, it's not like buying a stock in a company that has some product that it sells. It's you physically holding some precious metal, and now you're exposed to the whims of the market. Again, precious metals over the last few years have been very susceptible to stagnating growth. They've been susceptible to changes in market. If you own silver and suddenly they discover a silver mine someplace, that's going to hurt the price, because now, it's a supply and demand scenario, and suddenly now there's more supply. So ultimately, if you're getting cold called on an investment, that should be the end of it. That should be the red flag. That should be why is this person calling me? And why are they offering me huge returns? And unfortunately, most times it's to extract the money from you and put it in their pocket. And so just be very careful, particularly if they're offering precious metals or currency. The next one, in terms of commonality, is an investment called life settlements. And I find this one to be particularly morbid just because of what they are. And essentially what you are doing is acquiring someone's insurance death benefit. And what the wholesalers of this investment will do is they'll find people who have insurance and they need the money now as opposed to after they die. And so they buy the insurance and acquire it. And now they're on the hook for making the premium payment. But they get the death benefit. So whenever that person passes away, they get the check from the insurance company. And so essentially what they're doing is betting on when you're going to die. If it's a $100,000 policy and you're 85 years old with cancer and they think they only have to make 8 payments before you'll pass, they'll run a formula and come up with how much they're willing to pay based on when they think you'll pass away. So to me, that one's just a morbid investment in general. But they're out there. They're called life settlements. You do see quite a bit of fraud with them, and it's not just I mean, there are people out there who need this benefit. There are people who have an insurance policy, but they need the money now. Maybe it's for care or whatever it is. And so there's definitely a market of sellers. The problem is that the fraudsters, the ones who put some of these deals together anyway, they make misrepresentations about who the person is that sold it. They'll tell you, oh, we bought 10 policies and they all have AIDS and they're all going to die within 6 months. And then you come to find out later that was not remotely true. And so you buy a life settlement thinking, I'm going to get this great return because it's going to start paying out all these insurance policies. Meanwhile, you're stuck with it 8 years later making premium payments because the people haven't died. And so that's where the fraud comes in, is the way they package the deals and the representations that they make. So just be on the lookout for that investment in general. The next one we see is unregistered investments. This one would be a challenge for investors to identify because all these investments are sort of going to sound the same. But ask the broker the question: is this registered, and with whom? Investments need to be registered typically with the SEC. Unfortunately, our world is shrinking in terms of the information that's available. Get on Google. If you Google a thing and you can't find it on the SEC website, ask some questions because it should be there. And if it's not, that could be a red flag for you. Another one that we see is prime bank scams. And the hook on this one is convincing you that this investment is for the wealthy. This is what the uber wealthy do, and don't you want to be doing the same types of things that they do to acquire wealth? That's usually the pitch that you're going to see on that one, but it's another sort of machination of the same type of fraud, which is to make outlandish claims of return in exchange for them getting your money. But if you're being offered a prime bank investment, that it's cause for concern. Ask more questions. Another one is investment seminars. And this isn't an investment particular, but this is a type of investment fraud that we see a lot. Seminars is a way that either new financial advisors or financial advisors that don't have a solid book of business often go about acquiring new clients. But you have to understand when you're going to those things, maybe they're offering you a free lunch, but they're doing it in the hopes of getting new clients. And the financial, unless it's a new financial advisor, and why would you want a new one anyway? But if it's an older financial advisor who's still doing seminars, you have to ask why. Why doesn't this person already have a pretty established book where they don't have to be out there doing that? So I think it's cause for concern just because of who's typically the ones doing them. I don't think by its very nature that it's necessarily bad that somebody would do an investment seminar where they want to pass along some information. But usually it's the financial advisors who don't have an established book of business, don't have enough clients, and you have to ask why that is. Why do they need to pay for a free lunch for me? So just be on the lookout if you go to those, and understand certainly it's a sales pitch. I mean, you're there for a reason. It's not to eat their food. So the last one that I'll go into are annuities. And this is one that is not, it's not the investment itself. Annuities can certainly have a time and a place. And it's the insurance component. If you're looking for insurance for a particular need, then an annuity could certainly be appropriate. But the reason that we see a lot of fraud involving annuities has to do with the commissions that it pays. It is one of the higher commission products that's out there. And so that just makes it more apt for abuse by the bad financial advisors. What you'll see in terms of abuse is either recommending an overconcentrated portfolio in annuities. Anytime you put all of your money in one basket, it's going to be a bad idea. But if they're telling you to put all your money in annuities, it's probably to maximize commissions because it's unlikely that you need such a substantial insurance component to your portfolio. And if they're selling on, there's sub-accounts and we're still going to get mutual funds and all these things in the sub-accounts, well, why wouldn't you just buy the mutual funds? Because that's going to pay a substantially lower commission and usually result in a better rate of return for you. So if they're doing that, that's a red flag. And if they're switching you from annuities, saying, I know you bought this 3 years ago, but this new product that they've got is substantially better. That's called annuity switching. It's basically a form of churning where they're sort of just flipping the annuities to keep getting the commission. So just be on the lookout for that, because that's another instance where we see the product abused, and unfortunately annuities is one where you see a lot of fraud. So those are the 10 to be on the lookout for. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with some more info.
of Vero Beach, covering the Treasure Coast from Port St. Lucie to Sebastian, can handle all your printing and copying needs, from large format and blueprints to business cards and brochures, plus a full line of promotional products. Minuteman Press of Vero Beach. Google it.
Minuteman Press. Get a free quote. 567-4645. Minuteman Press is a member of the iTex trading community. Your iTex dollars are welcome. Why Aguavita Services? Because you want a safe, sanitary, and energy-efficient pool in your backyard. Rediscover your why and get back in the pool of your dreams. Aguavita Services is a state-certified pool renovation expert with over 13 years in business in Vero Beach. Let Aguavita Services help you get in the swim again. Aguavita Services, water for your life. 7940586, part of the iTex trading community. Your iTex dollars are welcome.
You can trust Sandpiper Pest Control, serving Indian River, St. Lucie, and Brevard. Certified by the state of Florida to treat homes, lawns, and termites. Fully licensed and insured. Priced right, effective, and friendly.
Hi, this is Joel, the owner of Sandpiper Pest Control. Sandpiper can solve your pest issues. No contracts to sign, just results.
Call for a free estimate. 772-589-0204. Sandpiper Pest Control, a member of the iTex trading community. Your iTex dollars are welcome.
Welcome back. You're listening to Wall Street versus Main Street. I'm your host, Dax White. Before the break, we went through the top 10 most commonly seen investment frauds that are out there. For the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about those were sort of, we went through tips on how to avoid being involved in them. Now we're going to talk about what happens if you already have been. What do you do? If you've been ripped off, what do you do? And it depends on what your motivation is. Let's say that you've been defrauded but haven't lost any money, but you've been ripped off. Then maybe your motivation there is just to make sure it doesn't happen to somebody else, at which point the best thing that you can do is reach out to the regulators. That would be FINRA. If it's a financial advisor, they're likely registered and regulated by FINRA, which is FINRA, and you can find them at finra.org. Or if they're not registered by FINRA, they're probably then registered by the SEC. So visit sec.gov and report them there. They've got they make it very easy on their website to find places for you to complain, and you can file a complaint and try to initiate an investigation by a regulator. So that's what you would do if you think the guy's a bad guy, but you haven't necessarily lost any money. If you've lost money, if you've been swindled and you've lost a substantial amount of money, then while you still could file a complaint because you just, I don't want this to happen to somebody else, that's not actually going to put any money back in your pocket. That's not the function of regulators. The regulators are there to police the industry, and what they would potentially do if they investigated your person is slap them on the wrist, fine them, suspend them, whatever. But it's very rare that they actually, go to the point where they issue a fine and have that fine paid to you. So if you've lost money, what you need to be doing is talking to a private attorney about initiating a claim, either through FINRA or it depends on where the person is registered. It's either going to be through FINRA or it could be a different arbitration provision that calls for either AAA or JAMS. But usually it's FINRA. That's all we do. And so that's where you would want to look if you've lost money. And my suggestion in terms of private attorney is there's lots of lawyers who will take a case where you've lost hundreds of thousands of dollars on a contingency fee and sort of go, I'm going to try to figure this out. Talk to somebody that this is what they do. There's very few lawyers out there in the country that exclusively do this kind of work, and FINRA is sort of its own animal, and you're going to want to have somebody that is experienced with this type of work. So try to find somebody who fits into that category. And that's it. Thank you for joining us. And next week, we're going to be talking about churning. I'm going to try to explain what it is and go into some detail about how to identify it. And if you have questions for the show, visit us at wallstreetvmainstreet.com, and I'll try to answer those questions on a future episode.
You've been listening to Wall Street versus Main Street. The views expressed by the participants of the program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by, the White Law Group, its officers, directors, employees, agents, representatives, shareholders, nor any of its subsidiaries. None of the content should be considered legal advice. As always, consult a lawyer.